Hi, everyone. This is Mrs. Sendrak, and I am going to be reading your language arts work from your week 2 packet. The passage is titled Excerpt from the Wonderful Wizard of Oz by Frank L. Baum. Dorothy, a young girl from a small, boring town in Kansas, has just been swept away in her own home by an unexpected cyclone. She experiences some harsh and dangerous winds as she and her dog Toto fly through the gray sky in their home, hoping to survive the frightful event. Unexpectedly, when the winds die down, Dorothy and Toto land far, far away from their field their home was built in. Chapter 2. Council with the Munchkins. She was awakened by a shock so sudden and severe that if Dorothy had not been lying on the soft bed, she might have been hurt. As it was, the jar made her catch her breath and wonder what had happened, and Toto put his cold little nose into her face and whined dismally. Dorothy sat up and noticed the house was not moving, nor was it dark, for the bright sunshine came in at the window, flooding the little room. She sprang from her bed and, with Toto at her heels, ran and opened the door. The little girl gave a cry of amazement and looked about her, her eyes growing bigger and bigger at the wonderful sights she saw. The cyclone had set the house down very gently, for a cyclone, in the midst of a country of marvelous beauty. There were lovely patches of greensward all about, with stately trees bearing rich and luscious fruits. Banks of gorgeous flowers were on every hand, and birds with rare and brilliant plumage sang and fluttered in the trees and the bushes. A little way off was a small brook, rushing and sparkling along between green banks, and murmuring in a voice very grateful to a little girl who had lived so long on the dry gray prairies. While she stood looking eagerly at the strange and beautiful sights, she noticed coming toward her a group of the queerest people she had ever seen. They were not as big as the grown folk she had always been used to, but neither were they very small. In fact, they seemed about as tall as Dorothy, who was a well-grown child for her age, although they were, so far as looks go, many years older. 3 were men and 1 a woman, and all were oddly dressed. They wore round hats that rose to a small point a foot above their heads, with little bells around the brims that tinkled sweetly as they moved. The hats of the men were blue. The little woman's hat was white, and she wore a white gown that hung in pleats from her shoulders. Over it were sprinkled little stars that glistened in the sun like diamonds. The men were dressed in blue, of the same shade as their hats, and wore well-polished boots with a deep roll of blue at the tops. The men, Dorothy thought, were about as old as Uncle Henry, for 2 of them had beards, but the little woman was doubtless much older. Her face was covered with wrinkles, her hair was nearly white, and she walked rather stiffly. When these people drew near the house where Dorothy was standing in the doorway, they paused and whispered among themselves, as if afraid to come farther. But the little old woman walked up to Dorothy, made a low bow, and said in a sweet voice, "You are welcome, most noble sorceress, to the land of the Munchkins. We are so grateful to you for having killed the wicked witch of the East and for setting our people free from bondage." Dorothy listened to this speech with wonder. What could the little woman possibly mean calling her a sorceress and saying she had killed the wicked witch of the East? Dorothy was an innocent, harmless little girl who had been carried by a cyclone many miles from home, and she had never killed anything in all her life. But the little woman evidently expected her to answer, so Dorothy said, with hesitation, "You are very kind, but there must be some mistake. I have not killed anything." "Your house did anyway," replied the little old woman with a laugh, "and that is the same thing. See?" She continued, pointing to the corner of the house. "There are her 2 feet still sticking out from under a block of wood." Dorothy looked and gave a little cry of fright. There, indeed, just under the corner of the great beam the house rested on, 2 feet were sticking out, shod in silver shoes with pointed toes. Now for the questions. Question number 1. Read each statement, then organize the statements in a complete summary. Put the number 1 by the first event, then 5 by the last. Dorothy looked in amazement out the window of her home to see a brightly colored landscape and beautiful sunshine. The small woman introduced herself to Dorothy and explained that she and her home had fallen in the land of the Munchkins. Dorothy finds that her home has landed on and killed a wicked witch. Dorothy woke suddenly and in shock after her house landed somewhere far away from home. Dorothy noticed a group of strangely dressed people coming toward her. She didn't think they were adults, nor did they look like children. If you are completing this on Google Classroom, this question looks a little bit different. These are labeled A through E, and then you have to place them, or you have to choose a multiple choice answer that puts them in order. But it is the same question with the same content. Question 2. Read this excerpt from the text. And before we read the excerpt, I'm going to go ahead and read the questions so that you know what you're going to be looking for while you are reading. So it says, based on this excerpt, contrast the Wicked Witch of the East and Dorothy. Use as many details from the text as you can to support your claim. So when you contrast, you're going to say how things are different from each other. So you're going to say how the Wicked Witch of the East and Dorothy are different from each other. And then you're going to use details from the text to support your claim. So here is the passage, or the excerpt from the passage. When these people drew near the house where Dorothy was standing in the doorway, they paused and whispered among themselves, as if afraid to come farther. But the little old woman walked up to Dorothy, made a low bow, and said in a sweet voice, "You are welcome, most noble sorceress, to the land of the Munchkins. We are so grateful to you for having killed the Wicked Witch of the East and for setting our people free from bondage." Dorothy listened to this speech with wonder. What could the little woman possibly mean by calling her a sorceress and saying she had killed the Wicked Witch of the East? Dorothy was an innocent, harmless little girl who had been carried by a cyclone many miles from home, and she had never killed anything in all her life. But the little woman evidently expected her to answer, so Dorothy said with hesitation, "You are very kind, but there must be some mistake. I have not killed anything." So based on that excerpt, contrast the Wicked Witch of the East and Dorothy. Use as many details from the text as you can to support your claim. Question 3, and this is a part A and a part B. Part A, which of the following words is the best synonym for the word bondage in the text? So synonym is a word that means the same. So you're finding a word that means the same or a synonym for bondage. Is it freedom? B, captivity? C, detention? D, loneliness? And then part B, what evidence from the text supports your answer for part A? So go back in your text, find the word bondage, and see what helped you determine the meaning of that word. Question 4 is also a part A and part B. Part A, what is the overall tone of the land of Munchkins based on the author's description of the setting? So A, it is a dismal, dreary land. B, it is an old, depressing land. C, it is a blissful, cheerful land. Or D, it is an upbeat, musical land. So what is the tone of the land of Munchkins? And then part B, what piece of evidence best conveys the mood of the land of Munchkins? A, as it was, the jar made her catch her breath and wonder what had happened. And Toto put his cold little nose into her face and whined dismally. It is an old, depressing land. B, banks of gorgeous flowers were on every hand, and birds with rare and brilliant plumage sang and fluttered in the trees and bushes. It is an upbeat musical land. C. Three were men and one a woman, and all were oddly dressed. D. There, indeed, just under the corner of the great beam the house rested on, 2 feet were sticking out, shod in silver shoes with pointed toes. Question 5. You're going to choose 3, blank, blank, and blank. Dorothy goes through a range of emotions in this excerpt of the text. Choose 3 words that best describe the feelings Dorothy experiences in this excerpt. A range of emotions means different emotions. So, what emotions or feelings did Dorothy experience in this excerpt? A, confused, B, scared, C, surprised, D, amazed, E, lonely. You're going to choose 3. Question 6 is part A and part B. Part A, what does the word jar mean in this text? So you'll need to go back in the passage, find the word jar, and read around it for some context clues. Does jar mean cold, tornado, shake, or container? And part B, what evidence from the text best supports your answer for part A? So look back in the text, find support for the answer you chose that is the meaning of the word jar as it is used in the story. And those are all of your questions and the passage for this week's language arts work.